Hello, Garland Nixon here, and there's a few things going on. Sergey Lavrov has done an interview on Meet the Press in the U.S., and of course, the Europeans are in deep and serious guana. Um, and we're going to discuss the interview and what's happening in Europe. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and there's a couple things going on I think we need to talk about. Let's start here. Sergey Lavrov last week did an interesting interview on Meet the Press here in the United States. A couple of things I'd like to touch base on about the interview. Let's talk about this for starters, why that interview happened. Yeah, as you probably know already, under Joseph Biden, one of the things that happened was that the president gave a order, or so we're told. I don't think anybody really believes that Joe Biden was in charge, but apparently somebody, perhaps Joe Biden, or perhaps the collective Joe Biden, or perhaps Joe Biden's owners, gave a order that no one was to talk to the Russians, no one was to negotiate with the Russians, right? And of course, this included the media. Well, Trump's back, and of course, we had a couple things happen. And that is, well, of course, I'm being facetious about the media because, as we know, and this is related, Tucker Carlson did an interview with Vladimir Putin. A few months back, Sergey Lavrov did an interview, and I think he brought in Larry Johnson and Judge Knapp, and I believe those might have been the only two. There might have been others. But whatever the case may be, what we see now is a pivot towards alternative media, right? We see the strength of alternative media, the power of alternative media, the reach of alternative media, and most important, the preference of alternative media, right? Do not be misled. The only reason that NBC did this is because they've been embarrassed, humiliated, and outwatched by alternative media, right? The fact that Tucker Carlson got like hundreds of millions of views, and these, clowns like, oh, we can't give Vladimir Putin a space on our TV set, so we can't have his voice heard by Americans. Well, guess what? There's nothing you can do to stop him from getting a space on in the media sphere. There's nothing you can do to stop his voice from being heard. And of course, even if I did or didn't like Vladimir Putin, if I did or didn't like him is irrelevant. The question is, do the people have a right to hear what he has to say? And when you're in the United States, the government in which that represents the country in which I reside, shows animus towards a country that has the ability to wipe us off the face of the earth, then we need to hear what the leader has to say of that country. It was reported, I don't know if it's true or not, I think it is, that recently Vladimir Putin, I don't know if it was a speech or whatever, and someone said, yes, Russia has the ability to take America out, to destroy America, wipe America out off the face of the earth, paraphrasing, in 30 minutes. And he said, no, that's wrong, 20, right? So the bottom line is this. Everybody understands that the U.S. is an existential threat to Russia. Russia is an existential threat to the U.S. If missiles start flying, we all die. It's an important thing to keep in mind, right? Therefore, the people whose lives are on the line, that would be me, and probably some of the people in my chat, have every right to hear all sides of the argument. So let's get back to this. Vladimir Putin does the interview with Tucker Carlson. Sergey Lavrov does the alternative media interview with Larry Johnson, Judge Knapp, etc. And now, being humiliated, seeing that the losing all of their viewers, NBC finally says, okay, Meet the Press, we're going to bring in Sergey Lavrov. Now, if you watch the interview, it's exactly what you would expect, right? The U.S. media is, hostile towards Russia. Bottom line is, what you see is puppets for the empire, right? It is, okay, Russia's the bad guy. You don't do a professional interview with him. Why you have to do a hostile interview? Again, interestingly, the people in NBC who put this in for this interview together and put this clown Christian whatever out there, and she just basically tried to attack. She basically did what a neocon attack dog. Well, yes or no answer. Now, I mean, you are interviewing the foreign minister of Russia. It's a yes or no answer. She literally asked, did Russia invade Ukraine? What is the point of that question? You know, it was as if she felt, or her handlers felt, that this was nothing but an opportunity to go after the foreign minister. The enemy is there. Attack, assault, go after him. Let's show everyone how bad he is, as opposed to Tucker Carlson, Larry Johnson, and Judge Napolitano, who said, hey, we want to hear what you have to say. We're listening to you. We're all ears, right? That's what the people want to hear. So even watching the interview, I think what they really did, rather than edged in on the space of alternative media and said, okay, alternative media, you're getting interviews with him, I guess we got to do it too. What you really did was that you proved to the people that watch alternative media that they don't need to watch you. That they're like, I want to see Sergei Lavrov. And then they watch this Kristen, whoever, she's like, did you invade Ukraine? He's like, yes or no answer. Yes or no. Did you invade Ukraine? We have facts. And she goes, the facts. Facts. Here are the facts. Russia got kindergartens and maternity wars. And I'm sitting here like, oh, what are we going to go next to? Puppies and kittens? Russia doesn't like puppies and kittens, right? So I'm listening to this propaganda. And all he said was what you'd expect. Lavrov's like, look, we don't attack civilian targets. He could have went to Gaza on her, but he didn't do it. I wish he had. I wish he'd said, I think you're mistaking our special military operation with the Israeli attack on Gaza. What's that? Hospitals, did you say? You got a problem with people attacking hospitals, maternity wards, tents full of refugees? Is that what you're accusing us of doing? I don't like to see him do that. But of course, we understand that's not the direction he was going. So at any rate, I think he was professional. He stood his ground and he said, hey, Trump wants to try to get a deal. We're going to try to get a deal. Now, you and I can quabble with that and say, hey, we don't trust Trump as far as you can throw it, or anyone else in the empire, as far as you can throw a T-72 tank. But he's a foreign minister, and he did his job, and he did it professionally, right? It was great. I think Lavrov was good. And basically all we saw was a hit job on him, and he was professional. And a reminder to those of you who watch me or Judge Knapp or The Gray Zone or Larry Johnson, Dima, blah, 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 that this is what you want. You want somebody that's trying to figure out what's going on. When they say facts, when she said, here are the facts, what she meant was, according to the Ukrainians. Now, she said, you've attacked this, you've attacked this. The question is this. You believe those to be facts. Where'd you get them from? Oh, wait a minute. They all came from the Ukrainian intelligence. Basically, what she should have said is, here are the facts. Ukraine has made the following claims, but Ukraine doesn't really exist. So she could have just said the CIA has made the following complaints. A bunch of crap, absurdities, preposterous interview. Watch it at your own, both at your own leisure and at your own peril. Okay. But I thought that Lavrov was strong. He was professional. I think that ultimately a few things came out of it. So let's talk about some of the things that happened. Number one, in an interview with an NBC on Sunday, Lavrov was asked whether halting Moscow's military offensive was the only concession it was prepared to make, right? We don't have any interest in territories. And this is important. He says, we have the biggest of territory on earth. An important point. I think that is an important point for the people who are arguing that Russia's trying to expand into, what do they got, 11 or 12 time zones? Russia is the largest country on earth. And what you're telling me is it wants to get larger. And it wants to take a country full of banderites and goose steppers on its liability sheet, so it's responsible to pay for paying for these people. No. The fact of the matter is, it's not Russia that's trying to take Ukraine. It's the United States that overthrew, and its vassal ally, et cetera, whatever you want to call them in Europe, the puppets that overthrew the government of Ukraine. Russia warned them. It warned them over and over. It warned them in 2008 in Budapest? And it said, hey, look, guys, That's a red line. Over and over and over, the West was warned what could happen. Sorry about that. The West was warned over and over what could happen. And here we are. And the bottom line was it wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. This was an intent to take out Russia. They made it clear. This was an intent to weaken Russia. Russia knows what's going on, and Russia's not playing the game. And Russia's like this. Again, I always say this. Russia's position is this. You can stay in Ukraine, but you're going to have to fight to stay there. You can stay there as long as you want, as long as you're willing to fight, as long as you want. You know, it's interesting that they apparently, the Americans and the Brits told the Ukrainians, yes, we'll support you as long as it takes. What they left out was or until we run out of money and weapons, and or until there's no Ukrainians left, which of course, as long as it takes, will come after the other two. The first thing that's going to happen now is that they're running out of weapons and money. And the second thing that's happening is they're running out of Ukrainians. Sad, but that's where we are. He goes on to say, Lavrov said Moscow's goal is to remove any security threats to Russia coming from Ukrainian territory. And we clearly know what that means. The security threats are not from Ukraine. The security threats are from NATO. NATO's made it clear. They've encroached on the Russian territory. They've made it pretty clear what their game plan is. Lavrov was straight, pretty open in his NBC interview. Threats. So think about it, the way he put it. He didn't say threats from the Ukrainian government. He said, Moscow's goal is to remove any security threats to Russia, right? Okay. Coming from Ukrainian territory. That doesn't mean the Ukrainian government. And he said, any threats. He could have easily said, Russia's goal is to remove the threat of the Ukrainian military, of the Ukrainian regime, of the Ukrainian, right? He could have been very specific, but he was intentionally broad in his language. Remove any, which is broad, coming from Ukrainian territory, which doesn't mean anything about Ukraine. It's simply saying, I don't care if it's Ukraine. You ain't going to come to Ukrainian territory and threaten me. That's our goal. So however we have to do that, if it is to occupy Ukraine, take it over, whatever we got to do. If it's to, if we got to put a whole lot of Ukrainians in the ground, if we can get a deal, whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. But that's our goal, and we ain't stopping till the goal is done. He didn't go on to say, and your goal is to weaken us. And bottom line is this, we're going to see who reaches their goal first. That's all it is. This is, we both have a goal. We both have an ideal that we're trying to accomplish, reach, to get, to gain. And ultimately the question becomes, who gains theirs first? We shall see. We'll continue. He also says, as well as, and this is important, I think this is critical. This is a big one. Let's talk about why. Okay, Moscow's other goal, to protect the rights of ethnic Russian and Russian-speaking people who believe they belong to Russian culture and Russian history. Here's why that is important, and here's why NATO just can't and won't say yes to that, right? So one of the things that's happened prior to this military special military operation drove the SMO, and we'll call it the SMO. The SMO was a crackdown on Russians. And that has continued, wherein the Ukrainians have cracked down on all things Russian, right? Oh, well, you can't speak Russian in school. You can't speak Russian in government buildings or any official things, hearings, anything. And there were those I've heard that say you're not even supposed to speak Russian on the street. I don't know about that, but whatever the case may be, you can't speak it in school, and you speak Russian and you're of Russian ethnicity. You can't worship the Russian religion. You can't attend churches that are affiliated with the Russian Orthodox Church, all of this kinds of stuff, right? And that is the rights of ethnic Russians and Russian-speaking people, right? Okay, here's the deal. Why that's something that can't be achieved other than through force of arms. Bite my tongue, other than through force of arms. Look at what's happening in the Baltic states right now. Look at what's happening all throughout Europe. You can't read Dostoevsky. You can't you can't own a Russian breed cat or have a Russian tree. There's an assault on all things Russian. So The bottom line is this Banderite ideology has permeated Russia. Permeated Europe. It's ubiquitous throughout Europe amongst the ruling elite, not amongst the people necessarily, too much so amongst the people, particularly in some countries like Germany and Poland. Poland, boy, they're really good at hating. In Germany, well, their record speaks for itself, right? But my point is that if you look there, what he's saying, you can't do this in Ukraine. And what are the Europeans saying? Well, we're doing it all over Europe now. I mean, we are returning to our roots of the 1930s. The ruling elite are going back to the days when they were goose-stepping all over the place and saying Sieg Heil. That's where they are. So my point being, since the Nazi ideology is starting to shine through again, the ruling elite of Europe, who always were a bunch of freaking Nazis, since that's starting to show up again, it is being expressed in Ukraine. Ukraine is not an anomaly. Ukraine is an expression of the culture of the ruling elite, of the people who overthrew the government of Ukraine, of Kiev in 2014, and reinserted their ideological brethren and kin, those of the goose-stepping orientation. Okay, so you're looking at an expression of European ruling elites. They're freaking Nazis. And that's showing up in Ukraine. So when the Russians say denazification, when the Russians say we can't have a bunch of anti-Russian goose steppers running around, they're all over Europe. That's pretty much the ruling elite of Europe. So that kind of really means that only through force of arms will the Russians achieve their ultimate goal. Now, guess what? He also said this: not the only way to protect them against this Nazi regime is to give them the right to express their will. Isn't it interesting? What the Russians are saying is, those kind of rights that are in the Constitution, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, things of that nature, those rights that you guys are currently violating against the American people. Well, we're kind of like to see that the Russians in Ukraine get access to those. Why can't they speak their language? Why can't they worship the way they want to worship? Why can't they live their lives the way they choose? No, they're being oppressed. They're like, you can't read Russian books. I mean, again, it's an expression. Look what's happening in the Baltic states. Look what's happening throughout Europe. They're now that basically it's like, those who say the South will rise again, whatever that means. Well, what they mean is the Nazis will rise again. When in Europe, what they mean is the Nazis will rise again. They're saying Ukraine is the leading edge of our political ideology, and the Russians are saying, yeah, well, you can keep it the hell away from our border then. That's what the Russians are saying. Yeah, we already know that, but you better keep it the hell away from our border, because anything that comes any near our border that looks like there's some goose stepping going on will be cut off at the knees, right? That's reality. Lavrov went on to underscore that, quote, Ukraine has the right to exist. Okay. But now remember something. I've often said, I knew Congressman John Conyers. He was a man of a few words, but great wisdom. And one of the things that John Conyers said to me was during an interview, I used to interview him with WPFW. It was great. I felt very honored to interview a man who was good friends with Martin Luther King. How's that? He was the only man that Martin Luther King ever endorsed in politics. He was an anti-war guy. He led the out of Iraq caucus, the out of Afghanistan caucus. Of course, that's why they Me Too'd him and took him out, because he was a true anti-war guy. And I thought a lot of John Conyers. But one of the things that John Conyers said was the word "but" means ignore everything I said before. But, right? But means everything I said, ignore it. Well, I think you're a good person, but, well, forget that. I think you were a good person. The truth comes after but. The truth always comes after but. Ignore what I said. So when Lavrov says Ukraine has the right to exist, but ignore that part about Ukraine having the right to exist. That's all I'm saying. That's the Conyers rule. But it should be ready to let people go. In other words, look, you got a right to exist, but you no longer have a right to keep those Russian speakers there and their land. You forfeited that right by your actions. You forfeited that right by your attacks on these people. And most of all, you forfeited that right by goose stepping all over creation with Nazi iconography tattooed all over your body. You forfeited that right. And the only way you're going to get it back is through force of arms. And that just ain't going to happen. So, but you can keep trying. And he says, give the people the right to express their will. In other words, let them worship the way they want. Let them talk the way they want. Let them read the books. What's interesting is this. In Ukraine, they'll be able to do that. If they cross over into Poland or, God forbid, into the Baltics, they won't. Interesting, isn't it? Let us continue. Lavrov went on to underscore that. Okay, let's see. I think that's it. He noted, however, that Ukrainian officials have consistently sought to dehumanize and portray as terrorists people in his 5 regions that voted to join Russia in 2014 and 2022. So there we go. Sergei Lavrov spoke his mind, darn it. And you can like it or not. In reality, and the bottom line is this: do you have the kinetic means to stop the Russians from doing what they're doing? Currently, when it comes to NATO, the answer, you got to have the ability, you got to have the opportunity. What is the 3 things to commit a crime? Why do I always forget them? I used to teach this stuff. In order to commit a crime, you need 3 things. Let me see if I can remember what they were. The ability, the opportunity. I always forget the 3rd one. I can never remember, or I'll remember 2 out of 3. The bottom line is this. Well, when you're teaching crime, you say, what can you do to defend yourself? You can affect the opportunity, right? If a person, they may have the desire. They may have the desire to commit a crime. They may have the ability to commit a crime, but you can mitigate the opportunity that they have to make you the crime, the victim of their crime, right? So the bottom line is, there we go. The Europeans have the desire to thwart the Russians. They have the opportunity to thwart the Russians, but they don't have the ability to thwart the Russians. We want to stop the Russians from doing what they want to do in Ukraine, right? Do we have the opportunity? Yes, we know where the Russians are, and we have military. Do we have the desire? So we have the desire. Yes. Do we have the opportunity? Yes. Do we have the ability? No. And the main reason they don't have the ability, which we got to move on to next, is because the main first and absolutely, I guess actually the principal reason is because Europe is in a catastrophic economic decline, which subsequently means that it is in political turmoil and political instability. And therefore, the only way they could do this, the only ability they would have, would be just like Israel. We want to drag the United States into a war with Iran. And we go over to Ukraine, and the loony cokehead lunatics of Starmer, Macron, and Meretz, they want to drag the United States into a catastrophic war with Russia. Everybody wants to drag the United States into a catastrophic war with someone. And right now, to be quite frank, Trump, in those 2 instances, we don't talk about Venezuela. We don't know what's going to happen there. But if Trump tangles with Venezuela, I think he's going to get a whole lot more. He's going to bite off a whole lot more than he can chew. But we shall see on that one. But right now, we're talking about the European theater. In the European theater, the fools wanted to get the Americans to come over and fight a war for them with Russia. And it certainly appears, if you listen to J.D. Vance, especially, if you listen to Trump, they don't have a taste for that. And let's be honest, the United States doesn't necessarily have the capacity at this point to go to Russia's border and fight them. Man, that'd be nasty. And the United States, what are they going to do? If the U.S. says, okay, we're going to go to Russia, how are you going to fight Russia? Are we going to get troops in there? Well, guess what? I don't think the American people are going to stand for that. And when you start putting troops in, how many troops do we have? I don't think the Russia has maybe what, 600,000, 700,000, 800,000 troops in the area. and they got more other places. So, does the United States have 500,000 troops to put there? No, they don't. Can they get these troops and the truth? If they had them, could they get them there to fight Russia? Could they maintain supply lines to fight Russia? No, they couldn't. And they're on Russia's border where Russia's firing out of Russia's airspace. It wouldn't be good, the United States. And what are we going to do as far as ships taking supplies over? If you're now in a war with Russia, you got Russian subs all over the Atlantic. You think they're going to let, if you're going to fight Russia, you think they're going to let those ships full of supplies and soldiers go across the Atlantic unscathed? They're going to find all kinds of hypersonic missiles whistling down the barrel of their, smokestacks, and they're going to be blown to smithereens. So the bottom line is this. My point is this. The United States would catch hell trying to go to Russia's border fighting them, number one. And right now, the U.S. does not have a desire to do that. And of course, it would go nuclear and we'd all die, and the United States knows. As Clint Eastwood said in the movie The Outlaw Josie Wales, dying ain't no way to make a living. So I just don't think the United States is politically, militarily inclined to go to Russia and to fight Russia over Ukraine. Look, that's the idea of proxies, right? That's the idea of having a proxy. That's the idea of having some poor schlump that you use for cannon fodder. That's it. They're cannon fodder. That's why you need cannon fodder, so you don't have to fight it yourself. Hey, sucker. Yeah, here's some money. Go die at the hands of the Russians. Yes, we will fight the Russians. We are the Band of Rights. We're taking out the Russians. Yeah, wink, wink, wink. Good idea, Band of Rights. You go right over there. We'll be with you until we get tired. I mean, as long as it takes. Yeah, sorry. As long as it takes, we're going to be right there. Unfortunately for you, it is taking a little longer than I thought, and I got some other things to do. So handle it up. I'll go talk to these guys over here, Starmer, Swarmer, Smarmer, the rest of these clowns. They'll look out for you. Right. I don't know if you know right now, if you've been following the current events, but let's see, Germany's economy is in a downward spiral like we haven't seen in quite a long time. And Merz is could even care less. The Germans are like, hey, our economy's crashing. And Merz was like, oh, shut up. For God's sake, can't you see I'm trying to deal with the Ukraine? And they're like, but we're losing our jobs. We're losing our money. We're losing our lifestyle. We're losing our schnitzel, for God's sake. We got to have schnitzel. We're at a schnitzel. Merz is like, schnitzel. Leave me alone here. I gotta meet with Zelensky. We're on this train. We're sniffing some cocaine. We go high. She go high. Cocaine. Da-na-na-na, da-na-na. Right? That's Merz right now. He's trying to get high, man. Don't mess with a guy when he's trying to get high. He's gassing it up. That's what Merz is doing. Leave him alone. Let him get high. That's all he's going to do. He's going to get high on and most likely with Zelensky. You got Macron. I don't know what the hell he's doing. Don't even start me with Macron. Isn't it interesting? Where did Macron work? Rothschild Bank. Goldman Sachs. Where did old Merz come from? He was a German CEO of BlackRock. Gee, isn't that interesting? So we got the big banker guys here, the big money ruling elite banker guys in charge of these countries. And both of them are well below 20%. And both of them are driving their countries straight to the gates of hell economically. And of course, they got a war started and they're trying to drag Trump in. And the U.S. is like, perhaps you don't understand how empire works. You suckers are the ones that suffer, and we will eat you for dinner if we need some more nutrition. And right now we're hungry as hell. So we're going to steal all of your stuff. And if you want to go fight the Russian, sure. We're done with that one. We got other things to do. Have a nice day. Toodles. That's what empire does. It sticks you out there. It puts you in a bad situation, and then it leaves your ass high and dry. And that's what the Europeans are getting right now. They're getting left high and dry. Deal with it. Okay. I think what we're looking at also is I think the Brits, I think there was a letter written that basically said they're in such bad shape they may have to go to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and borrow some money to get the hell out of the deep and serious trouble they're in. And of course, you know what the IMF does? You see what it does to African countries and South American countries. It's like, sure, we'll lend you the money, but we got a few requests if you want the money. Number one, you got to raise taxes and cut social programs. And you just, in other words, you have to royally screw your population. Neoliberalism on steroids. I think the UK is in danger of some kind of revolutionary style violence. What it'll look like, I don't know. I hope it doesn't happen. I never want to see violence, and I never want to see people suffer, and I don't want to see countries fall apart. But if you got a guy in charge like Starmer, revolutionary violence is in the cards, brother. When you start putting these kind of guys in charge, when you go from Bojo to Liz Truss, to Rishi Sunak to Starmer, when you got these kind of clowns in charge, revolutionary violence is damn near guaranteed. So the direction that the UK is going in economically is down. Politically, I'm not going to say it's not. It's at the bottom now. It's so close to the bottom. If they hit the bottom, it wouldn't make a sound. It's in serious trouble. I don't even. What do I say about Macron? What do I say about Macron? This guy, his partner, is beating the bloody hell out of him. I look at Macron, and he's getting swatted in the face in front of a plane. You know, he's like, the plane door opens, and Macron's face is like jarring to the side. You ever see those pictures where a boxer, it's in slow motion, and his fist hits a boxer in slow motion, and like their lips are still way over here, but their heads are moving here, and their mouthpiece is flying. And that's what when old Brigitte Macron landed a haymaker on Emmanuel Macron, that's what his face looked like. That's what his face, Brigitte. I'm gonna tell you right now, I work out regularly. I've trained in self-defense. I don't know if I'd want a piece of Brigitte Macron based on the way I saw those blows thrown. I don't know if I want to step up to that. I might just run. Well, look, I got an undershirt on. I'd put it on a mop handle and be waving the white flag, because Brigitte Macron can throw some haymakers. Looking like Brigitte Macron looks like Clint Eastwood in The Outlaw Josie Wales. You hear what I'm saying? In more ways than one. But so you got old Mr. BlackRock, you got tough guy Starmer. We'll leave that one alone. And a man who's being mercilessly and horrifically abused by his spouse. I just don't think the future's bright for Western Europe. I think that's my way of communicating to you that the future ain't bright for Western Europe, and the Russians know time's on their side. So the Russians are laying low waiting, and they're watching the economic unraveling. And see, here's the thing about it. The Europeans and Trump has really put the Trump administration, whatever you want to call it, has really put the Europeans in a bad situation, because think about these two things coming together at the same time. This is critical to think about what's happening. What the Trump team has done, I don't want to beat a dead horse. You've heard me say it many times. It's clear. What they're doing is they're saying, the Ukraine conflict is getting ready to crash land, and we don't want to be the ones to take the hit. So we're just going to say, Europe, you handle it. You give us the money. Here's the part I love, and we'll mark everything up 10%. Why? Why is the Trump administration marking everything up 10% to the Europeans? Because, in the words of P.T. Barnum, it's against the laws of God and nature to allow a sucker to keep his money. So they're the Europeans. Look over it. You're doing a business with Starmer, Macron, and Merz. Who ain't going to mark it up 10%? Hey, Macron, Starmer, Merz, you want this deal? Yes, Daddy, we want this deal. We're marking it up 10%. Okay, Daddy, thank you. And you don't have the money, do you? No, we don't. Give it to me anyway. Yes, Daddy, we will. Why wouldn't you? Trump, I think he's giving them the benefit of the doubt. I think he should mark it up 25%. What are they going to do? Say no, they're suckers. You got to treat a sucker like a sucker. They're marks. Treat a mark like a mark. There's a lot of things Trump does. Genocide, causing mayhem in Gaza, sending troops to the streets. A lot of things Trump does that I do not agree with. But abusing the suckers, I gotta say, you got to treat a sucker like a sucker. You got to treat a mark like a mark, right? And so good work there, Trump, even though you're screwing everything else up. I think, no, actually, Trump's screwing it up by only doing 10%. Come on, Trump. If you got somebody who'll pay you anything, mark it up 25. Hey, hell, you're doing 50% on the Indians. Instead of India, take that 25% and put it on the suckers. Hey, 25% suckers. Okay, daddy, they'll pay it. Such as they can. Again, go back to what I just said. The average German person can't afford to buy a decent schnitzel, but their government is going to pay an extra 10%, a premium of 10% in order to get weapons to give to the Ukrainians so they can then sell them on the open market, on the black market. You got to love that. They're going to buy them for the Ukrainians. You know what? And the Ukrainians are going to be selling for even, they're going to be like, oh, we only need 20 cents on a dollar. So here's $1 billion worth of weapons. Great. We'll sell them for 200 million. What do they care? They're free. And everybody knows that these are suckers. They're like, where'd you get those weapons? From the suckers. We got them from the marks. Oh, you got them from marks and suckers? Yeah. Well, can you give me a break? Nope. I want all my money. Pay me the money. Put some money in my hand. And they'll put the money in the hand and they'll use them in wherever, Africa, wherever they got it. The CIA probably buys them right back from the Ukrainians. Whatever the deal. So that's where we are. That's where we are. The Europeans are running out of time. I think that the time that they're running out is internally. Internally, as the economies come unraveled in these countries, as the leaders of these countries continue to focus on foreign policy, and in particular in Ukraine, the people will become more restive. And at some point, out comes the pitchforks, sharpened up the guillotines. You know how that story ends, right? You know how that story ends. And at some point, there was a time when I was not sure and I didn't know if violence would occur in Europe. I'm starting to be kind of sure that at some point violence will revisit itself. You're like, no, that was hundreds of years ago, or that was the French Revolution, and that was, well, you can only push people but so far. So I think we may very well return to the time when the Ichabod Crane option will visit itself to Paris and Berlin and places throughout Europe. I just think it's quite possible. Ichabod Crane, for you who don't know American mythology, it was an article, and there was the myth of Sleepy Hollow, and Ichabod Crane was the headless horseman. He was the headless horseman. His head was removed for whatever reason. He was a ghost or what have you, a spirit, but he was the headless horseman. I'm just saying, Meritz and Starmer and their ilk may want to read some of that stuff and just kind of, it may be prophetic to them. I'll throw that out there. So I think that what we're also looking at is a situation where God knows, how does NATO survive this? What is NATO? Before we go any further on that, here's the question. What is NATO right now? What is it right now? I mean, forget the future, forget whether NATO survived, forget the history of NATO, whether or not Putin tried to get into NATO in the past. All of those things are good and fine. But as a man who studies the only thing we have is the present. The past is a dream. We think about it, but it's over. You can't relive the past. It's done. The future is a hoax. If you say, well, I'm going to do this tomorrow, you don't know that you'll be alive tomorrow. You don't know that the person you're planning on doing that with tomorrow is going to be alive. Oh, we're going to go to a restaurant tomorrow. You don't know that the restaurant, how many times have you said, I'm going to a restaurant with Garland? You go to a restaurant, it's closed. There's a sign up there. Sorry, we're out of business. Oh, crap. I guess we go. So you can make all the plans you want for the future. The only thing you got is the present. Right now, you are stuck in the eternal now. So let's ask ourselves, where is NATO right now? Where is it? Okay. What is it? Where is it? There's an internal war, civil war, right? Right now, there are people who in Europe and of course in Washington, D.C., who have a particular idea of what NATO is and what it should do next. And that involves engaging with Russia militarily. That includes increasing, the military activities and violence against Russia, and ultimately ending up in a confrontation with Russia that will be a nuclear confrontation and we will all die. That's the plans of some people. I don't think that's a good plan. You probably don't either. I don't think it's going to be successful. But there are people who want to do that. Meanwhile, there are people, a Viktor Orban, a Robert Fico, a Donald Trump, who maybe for different reasons want to disengage from the Ukrainian conflict. Now, an argument can be made that the Trump administration wants the United States to disengage with Russia, but yet wants the Europeans to continue to engage with Russia. However you view it, that's up to you. Some people believe that they want a full deal with Russia, but I think at least to some extent, the Trump administration has been forced to negotiate through the lens of Russia's demands and accept that Russia's winning, even if their devious and diabolical plan may be to put this thing on ice, keep the Europeans harassing the Russians, go on about their business to attack the likes of Venezuela, Iran, China, everybody else. There's the warmongering lunatics and they want war with the entire world. But right now, they just don't want war with Russia. Right now, for them, they want to maybe throw the Europeans at Russia. Whatever the case may be, the Europeans are too weak to fight anybody. And that means that as we see NATO right now, militarily speaking, NATO has been demilitarized by this conflict. NATO has sent in its best military equipment, and most of that has been destroyed. So NATO is militarily not even a paper tiger. Militarily, it has been demilitarized. Right now, NATO is a military alliance that does not have any military power. Right now, the collective countries that make up NATO don't have military power. France, Germany, the UK, they don't have the personnel to produce for a conflict with Russia or much anybody else. They do not have the military hardware. They do not have the bombs and missiles and the necessary munitions for their military, what little military hardware they have. And lastly, they do not have the industrial capacity to continue to produce military hardware in order to sustain the conflict. None of NATO has that. So what is NATO today? What is a military alliance? To be in the present, what is a military alliance that doesn't have military personnel, that doesn't have military hardware, that doesn't have military munitions, and that doesn't have the foundational industrial capacity to create more military munitions and military hardware to sustain a conflict? What is that? It ain't really a military alliance. It's now a political alliance masquerading as a military alliance. It's now a subset of the European Union, the EU, whatever you want to call it. But it is a alliance. It's not, how about we put it this way? It's a political alliance. And as Jim says here, I'll put it a different way. He says weapons contracts. Good work, Jim. It is a political alliance, but more importantly, Jim, I'm with you. It's a money laundering operation. More than anything else, it is a money laundering operation. It is a way in which very, very wealthy people and powerful corporations continue to feather their nest until such time as the whole game falls apart, right? They know it's a Ponzi scheme and it's falling apart, so they continue to feather their nest until it falls apart. But a military alliance with no military capability, no underlying industrial capability, no unity, they're fighting amongst each other over what to do next, who's going to do it and how they're going to do it and who's going to pay for it. And once they get the money, if they get the money and they pay for the military hardware and munitions from the United States doesn't have the industrial wherewithal to produce that stuff in the short run. So they're going to have to go on a long list of buyers. Hey, we want to buy a bunch of stuff to fight for Ukraine. Fair enough, we'll take the money. Great. When can you deliver? It's going to be a few years. We can't tell you how many. Which means Ukraine has to continue to fight as it runs out of munitions and military hardware and personnel to wait until this other stuff gets created that ain't never coming. So that's where we are. That's where we are. And of course, and I think this is important. This is very, very important. Let's keep an eye on this. Let's keep an eye on this. All right. We're going to share the screen. And just when you thought things couldn't be bad enough, Russian President Vladimir Putin will embark on a 4-day trip to China next week for talks with President Xi. Also reportedly expected to attend a summit of the SCO during the trip, which will include large-scale talks between broader delegations. Beijing will hold major commemorative events on September 3rd to mark the 80th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II. Putin accepted Xi's personal invitation to attend the commemoration. There are those who actually wonder whether or not President Putin will be going there to make some kind of announcement. There are those who wonder whether or not the Russians and the Chinese will sign a military alliance. There are a lot of people who think that's a good idea. To an extent, I can make an argument that I could consider that a good idea, right? I could make that argument and say that in the interest of peace, since the U.S. empire wants to threaten Russia and China separately, but it knows that it can't really in any way, shape, or form threaten them collectively, and most likely can't threaten either one of them. Well, it can threaten them, but most likely it cannot successfully pursue military action against either one of them. It's going to take a butt kick in either way. It's going to take a swat that it had not, you know what I mean? I mean, let's face it, we got aircraft carriers, and Russia's got hypersonic missiles, and all they got to do is put a salvo of hypersonics against every one of those aircraft carriers, and we're at aircraft carriers that quick. We do not have a manner to stop them. How are you going to go to war with people when they got missiles that you have no way of defending against? Every missile that fires is likely to hit its target. And if they fire a salvo, you're done. So I'm just saying, it is possible that one has to consider the possibility that if the Russians and the Chinese were to sign some kind of a military alliance pact, that it would shut down the US's drive to war with either or both, because it would clearly at that point be suicide, which it already is. And that maybe that would be a good thing to save the world from nuclear annihilation. So I don't know. Again, this is all theoretical. It is my belief and my understanding of Chinese foreign policy it's my belief based on my understanding of foreign Chinese policy that the Chinese are not inclined to those kind of alliances. That the Chinese are inclined to see their quote alliances as partnerships, and that oftentimes they see like a military alliance as restrictive. Well, right now, what the Russians and Chinese say about their partnership is that there's no ceiling on it, that there is nothing, there's no restraints on it, which implies that it is potentially a military alliance, but we don't know. Now, there is a tie here that you cannot overlook, and that is North Korea, in that even as right now, the United States does its yearly threaten North Korea exercises on the Korean Peninsula, Russia has a military alliance and a mutual defense pact with North Korea, which means you go to war with North Korea, you go to war with Russia, and vice versa. And they have fought together in the Kursk region or at least they claim to have. So my understanding is, some people can correct me if I'm wrong, that for some time, the Chinese and the North Koreans have had a mutual alliance pact. So all I'm saying is this: if you attack China, and North Korea jumps in, which according to their mutual alliance pact, as I understand it, they're supposed to. We're going to war with China. North Korea says, okay, we're in. The minute you fire the first bullet in North Korea, they have an alliance with Russia, which means Russia says, I'm in. So seeing North Korea as the fulcrum, shall we say, for World War III, if the U.S. empire determines that it wants to go to war with either Russia or China, North Korea is the deciding factor that drags whichever one isn't involved in the war into it. Because if you go to war with, let's say, Russia and China and North Korea starts firing on you, okay, we're going to start firing at North Korea. But China's supposed to come in and vice versa. You see what I'm saying? You see the conundrum here? If you want to go to war with one, you got to go to war with both of them in a way already, but it's not an official alliance. It's not an official military partnership, but I think it is effectively one, but we will see. And it usually when Russian and Putin, or excuse me, when Putin and Xi get together, they sign all kinds of documents for economics. They reiterate their economic alliance, and they come up with new, projects they're going to do. Sorry about that. With new, pipelines they're going to build and all things of that nature. So we will see. I would expect at minimum there will be some new projects together. I do think that they will be meeting, planning, plotting on how to deal with the U.S.'s actions to thwart the two of them, to inhibit their growth. That would be certainly normal for the two of them to do, and we shall see. A couple of things. Trump has been invited to Moscow. Apparently, he's been invited to Beijing. Personally, I think he should take both of them, but we shall see. Let's see. Anything else? It says the planned visit had previously sparked speculation that the Russian leader could meet U.S. President Donald Trump while in China. Rumors of such a meeting circulated ahead of the Putin-Trump summit in Alaska earlier this month. Neither side explicitly ruling it out. If it so happens that Trump is there, that's talking about in Beijing, then of course we cannot rule out that the question of expediency of holding a meeting will be raised. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said speculation had also emerged about a potential three-way Putin-Trump-Xi meeting. Moscow, however, signaled it had nothing to say about such a meeting. Quote, "We know nothing about the possibility of such a meeting," Peskov has said. We know nothing. We see nothing. We got a couple of other things. We got apparently Zelensky, the Russians say that Zelensky's not a legitimate leader, so he can't sign a peace deal. We've got Zelensky saying, well, whatever happens in these deals, we got to retake Crimea and all of it. I mean, they can't hold on to like towns the size of a small community outside of, just outside of Baltimore, right? A small suburban community. They can't take towns that size. They can't hold on to them. They're losing all of that. But keep in mind something. Zelensky doesn't say we're going to take Crimea because he believes that they could take Crimea or anything else. He's doing that because his masters in Western Europe have said to him, you need to continue to say things to thwart this. You need to continue to say things to throw a monkey wrench in this. And that's his job. He's the puppet who thinks he's a real boy is doing what he's told. Oh, yes, we must still take Crimea. In other words, if anybody out there thinks that there's any possibility of a peaceful resolution of this conflict, you forget it. My masters have told me that we got to keep on fighting, and that means we, and by we I mean those poor bastards from 6 to 60 on the front line got to keep dying. But what do I care? Because hey, I'm the snowman. I get lots of snow. Anything else? I think that's just about it. I think that's about it. And of course, as always, before I leave, let's keep in mind what's happening in Gaza. Let's continue to stand our ground against this horrific crime against humanity. Let's continue to stand up against the genocidal regime in Tel Aviv. The genocidal regime in Kiev, of course, also. And I guess, to some extent, you can argue the genocidal regime, not to some extent, if we are supporting a genocidal regime in Tel Aviv, we're damn sure a genocidal regime ourselves. Thank you very much. Everybody, share this on all your social media platforms. Follow me on Rockfin. Follow me on Rumble. And if you can afford it, if you can afford to go on Patreon or buy me a coffee or PayPal or even Cash App, I certainly would highly appreciate that. You see my what is it? PO box there. People send letters, people send books, people send magazines, people send donations, people send all kinds of stuff. Anything you can afford to send or want to send or wish to send. Hey, I read it all. Thanks a lot. Everybody have a great day. You see my PO box at the bottom, but there you go. PO Box 32, Glen Burnie, Maryland. Snail mail. Mail me whatever you want. Peace. Share this on all your social media platforms. I am out.